Hi, I'm Judy Hayner with Bernina of America, and I'd like to welcome you to the Bernina Community Studio. Today's lesson for the embroidery is based on using a in the hoop project. And the project is creating a pocket that will embellish a purchased t-shirt. So as you can see, it's kind of fun to take an already made t-shirt. Of course, you could make your own as well. And using the Scissortail's collection, create a pocket that is special for that special wearer of your t-shirt. To create the pocket, I'll be using two designs from the collection 51240. It's in the hoop pocket peekers, and again from Scissortail Stitches. There's two designs used. One is a stitch and turn pocket, and I'm using the shark, the large size. That's design number 11. And then also the pocket placement, which is large as well, and that's design number 12. So this will be a very fun project, all done in the hoop. And I do recommend that you that you print out the PDF that comes with the collection, because there's some additional good information in that will help you step through if you have additional questions. Now, before we get started, I would like to share with you just a little bit of information and some tips about embroidering with knits, but also share with you some of the supplies that we're going to be used. Obviously, we have a purchased t-shirt, so that's what we're going to be using. You'll also be cutting out fabric for your pocket. And then we're going to be using two different stabilizers. One is a fusible woven, which is put on the back of the pocket front to give it more stability, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in my tips. You'll have a lining piece as well, and then we're going to hoop a fusible poly mesh into the large oval hoop. And when we hoop it, we're going to put the fusible sides down, and I'll explain that a little bit further as well. Again, we're going to be using a topping so that we make sure that, and it's stitch H2O, to make sure that all of our stitches stay right on the surface of the fabric. For placement, I recommend using the Stable Stick template sheets. It really does help. It's something you can print out. It peels off, and then you can position it right on the shirt to help you with the placement of the design. Embroidery needles, we're working with a knit, so recommending you use ballpoint. That way, it'll make your design look much nicer, and you don't pierce the loops of your knit. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We're going to do tape tearaway. It's my best friend. And also the point and press tool. That's pretty handy when we turn the pocket. An assortment of threads. And to do the shirt, we're also going to be using the midi hoop. Controlling knit fabrics in the embroidery hoop can be a little tricky if you don't use the right stabilizer and the design, as well as the correct needle. All of those things contribute to you taming that stretchy fabric and having success with your, especially in the hoop projects or any of your special projects. So let's discuss them just a little bit. When you have a knit fabric, anything that has a stretch to it, it is recommended that you use a cutaway stabilizer. The reason for that is it will stay with the garment. Whether it's washed and worn and washed and worn, it will always remain intact behind the design to support those stitches so that your design looks as good as the first day you wore it or the 100th day that you wore it. If the stabilizer does not stay with the stitches, you run the risk of the distortion. If you've ever had something that you washed and it just seemed like the design got all distorted, well, that was because it did not have a cutaway stabilizer behind it, or maybe enough stabilizer behind it, even if it was a cutaway, to support those stitches. So that's very important. Today, like I said, we're going to be using a poly mesh stabilizer. It happens to be fusible. It comes both ways. It's very nice to use with knits because it just has a little bit more flexibility and softness to it. But again, it will support the stitches because it stays with it through all of the washings. So that's a nice one to use, and a lot of times even 2 layers if you have a dense design. That's one form of stabilizer that needs to be used on knits. The other is the topping. the topping, which goes right on the top of the design, and you will remove it later, but it keeps those stitches from sinking into the fabric. Things like fleece and polar fleece or sweatshirt fleece, minky, any of those things that have a nap, using a topping will prevent the stitches from sinking into those fabrics and those naps. It also makes the design look better because the stitches stay on top and don't get distorted and uneven looking because they've sinked into the fabric. So that's a recommended use on knit fabrics too. If you haven't tried that before, you may find it very beneficial because your designs will look so much nicer. Now, when it comes to designs, there is some recommendations to do more of a closed designs or applique that cover a wide surface of the fabric versus an open line design. I do think you just have to kind of decide the look you want with your embroidery, but just know sometimes the design is going to show up nicer if it covers the those nap fabrics a little bit more and it doesn't sink into them. Because even after topping is removed, you may run the risk of that if your line design doesn't cover enough surface area to make it stand out. So that's a recommendation there. Again, with the needles, as I mentioned, with knit fabrics, even sewing them, it's recommended to use a ballpoint because in knits there's links, you know, they're linked together, the yarn is. And so with a ballpoint, it'll work its way around the link instead of piercing the link like a regular universal or embroidery needle. So that's why it is recommended to use the ballpoint, because when it pierces the link, that's what causes a run in the knit fabric. So that may be a helpful tip for you if you've had that issue before. The final thing I want to talk about is a backing fabric. So we have what goes in the hoop, our stabilizer. We talked about a topping fabric, which keeps it up onto the surface. And for some situations, you may want to use a backing fabric. This is Gentle Touch, which is made by OESD. And it's fusible on one side and kind of a tricot nylon on the other side. It's very soft. So if you do embroidery for children, people with sensitive skin, babies, you kind of want a soft surface against their skin. Sometimes with our embroidery stitches and thread buildup on the back side of the stitch, it can be a little bit rough. So if you take a piece of Gentle Touch, curve the edges, or you could pink them, and then fuse that to the back side of your embroidery design, it will create a softer surface against the sensitive skin. So those are things that might help you with your embroidering on knits. And I think the next step for us is to get ready to stitch out the pocket so that we can get our one-of-a-kind shirt ready to go. Okay, we're going to get ready to embroider the pocket for the shirt. So the first thing that we need to do is hoop the fusible poly mesh. And how you know that you're hooping it right is we do want the fusible side to be on the underside. And that you'll see a shiny reflection on that side of the poly mesh stabilizer. So we're using the large oval hoop. So I have it hooped and attached to the machine. And then we're going to go ahead and open up the pocket design. The first thing that I want to do here is go into the color tab, and I want to be able to see all the different color changes and what's going to be happening. The first thing that stitches will be a placement line. And then as you progress through the down arrows of the preview, you'll see the other stitching that happens, which would be a tack down for the fabric. So for me to be able to see these better on the screen, I like to go sometimes into the color tab and just change it to a darker color so that I can see the individual stitching processes. So if you touch the color bar of the one you want to change, then up comes the Isocord library. And from there, we can scroll through and make other selections and be able to see on screen then what's happening. So we continue to scroll down and make more changes to our thread colors, then it's easier on the screen to see those pieces. So I'm just going to continue to make those changes as needed to be able to see them. And once you're done with your color changes, then you'll be able to go ahead and we would shut the screen and we'd be ready to stitch the design. So I've got the changes all made. I'm going to go back and touch the edit icon and see that I can visually on screen a little bit better see what's happening with my design. Hoop is attached. We'll go ahead and we will touch the stitching icon, which is the needle, and now we're in the stitching screen. So again, first thing to stitch will be the tack down. I have the machine threaded with the color that is matching the t-shirt, and that's what'll stitch down here, and then we'll be placing the pocket fabric that I have pressed the fusible woven to down into the hoop. All right, so let's get ready to stitch. Okay, the placement line has completed its stitching. It's right there. The next step for us then is to place the pocket fabric into position over the top of the placement line and use the tearaway tape. A couple little pieces will hold it. Now the next thing that's going to do is going to start stitching the design. So we do want to put our topping over the fabric as well, and I like to kind of secure that with a couple pieces until it gets secured with stitches so that it doesn't shift around on you. We'll just position that into the hoop, and then we'll go ahead and we'll begin the stitching of the next design, which will be an outline of the pocket shape. The main part of the design has finished stitching, and I've removed it from the machine so that we can remove the topping, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to place the lining on top of here and tape it, and then we'll stitch the seam line. So the next thing would be to remove the topping by simply tearing it away from the stitches. So all the topping is removed, and the final step to making the pocket is to put the lining right sides together on top of your pocket. We'll go ahead and tape that into position also, and then we're going to take it back to the machine and it will stitch the seam line to join these two pieces together. Okay, so the pocket is turned and here's our opening, and then you use the turn and press tool to kind of accentuate your corners and run it along the seam, and that'll help things lay nice and flat. And then we're going to take it to the iron and press it. And when we press it, this is the fusible side of the poly mesh right here, and it will fuse the lining and the pocket together so there won't be any movement after that. And then we'll set this aside because we're ready to prepare the shirt for placement and stitching to apply the pocket to it. Okay, once the pocket's complete, we remove it from the hoop, and then we're going to do trimming around the edge of the stitching, about 1/4 inch. And when you get to these extensions, which is your turning, you do not want to cut them off. You just want to cut them even with the stitching. And then you want to make sure that you trim into the corners and trim away the excess at these corners, because then when we turn it, it won't be quite as bulky. So the pocket is ready to turn. Prepare your t-shirt for embroidery. You want to fold it and find your center, and I like to mark it with a piece of painter's tape. And this is just for reference. And I have determined that I want the center of my pocket design to be about 7 inches down from the shoulder and about 3 1/4 inches from the center. And then what I'm going to do is take a look at that in reference to this peel and stick template. But before I put this on, I want to do the marking, and I used chalk for this. And then I'm going to I would remove the tape because I don't want to hit it with heat, because then you need to go ahead and you need to press your fusible poly mesh onto the back of the t-shirt. And this will hold it in place when you're trying to hoop and when you're trying to position your design. So the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and put this template. And the nice thing is if you save your little paper, it's reusable. So I did use it on my first sample, and then I line it up with my marks on the shirt and place it into position. And this is where that part is going to stitch. So then the next thing I'm going to do is hoop it up. You can use the template for the hoop and line up the X and Y with the marks on the template that you placed into the shirt. And then we'd go ahead and slip this into the outer hoop. The item hooped. We're going to leave this on until we use pinpoint placement to align the vertical and the horizontal to make sure we have it hooped perfectly straight. We'll use pinpoint placement because then we know the design will stitch exactly where it's supposed to be. As you take it to the hoop, you know your challenge is all this excess fabric. So you will have to get it up over the top like so. And then when we get to the machine, we're going to be doing some binding of these pieces together to keep it out of the stitching area after we get it onto the machine. Once you get the hoop onto the machine, that gives you a chance then to go ahead and use the binder clip to help secure the bulk out of the way so that you have all of this open for you to be stitching. So there's binder clips at the top and along the sides, and I just roll it and then clip it. Now you will want to slow the speed down as you're stitching this so that you can monitor where the excess fabric is going to be. And pull up our new design, which is this one here, and then I will remove this paper after pinpoint placement. So let's use pinpoint placement to get it into position. Okay, with the design loaded, it loads vertically and we want it to stitch this way. So we're going to open up the information and we're going to touch rotate and rotate it a quick 90 degrees so that it'll be in the hoop in the right orientation. Now it knows that I have used the midi hoop for this. And the reason I used the midi hoop was to be able to rotate the design this way in its orientation to allow an easier hooping of the shirt. So we'll go ahead and touch the small I in the information in the breadcrumbs. And now we're going to choose pinpoint placement. We're going to use the grid placement on this. And first we're going to touch the center, because we need to line up the needle above the center of this design. So we'll use the multifunction knobs and we'll move it into a close proximity, and then we can rotate the hand wheel to see that we're pretty much straight on in the center of the design. So we'll move it back up to the highest position, and then we would go ahead and we would set that. And the next thing we want to do is touch the upper center dot so we can see that we are aligned vertically, and lower that. So we are. I'm not going to set this one because I also want to check down here to make sure that how the template was positioned. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to touch the bottom center dot. And as you can see, we're just slightly off. So we would go ahead and we would move side to side only because we're just trying to line it up onto the vertical positioning. And then we would go ahead and check it, be happy with that positioning, and we would go ahead and we would set it. Now we're ready to begin the stitching. We'll close this window, so we'll close this, and we'll go to the stitching screen. We have the template removed. Remember I said you can save this. You've saved the paper, you can put it back onto that. And the next thing that we're going to do then is prepare the machine for stitching with the correct color that we would like stitch, and then we're going to begin stitching the rest of the design. Now I have the machine threaded with the first color that's going to be stitching out, and also placed the topping into position because there will be some design, remember, stitching on each sides of this before we put the pocket into position. So let's go ahead and begin our stitching. Okay, the design that needed to be stitched onto the shirt has finished, and also it has stitched the placement line to tell us where to position the pocket. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this topping and then place the pocket into position and get it ready to stitch down. Okay, with the topping removed, now I've gone ahead and positioned the pocket in the barrier of the placement line and then secured it with the tape tearaway. Now we'll take it over to the machine and it's going to top stitch the pocket into position, and we'll have completed our project. With the pocket and its lining added to this t-shirt and the bulk of our seams, we have a pretty good amount of thickness going on here where the presser foot sits on. There is an adjustment that can be made in embroidery to raise the presser foot slightly for thick items like this. So we would touch settings before we stitch and go into the embroidery settings, and it's in the very center of your screen, and it's for thickness of fabric. So when you touch it, you have the ability to have it be 4 millimeters, 7.5 or 10 millimeters of thickness. So for this particular project, what I did was adjust it to 7.5 because with doing that, it did not drag along the pocket and push the pocket when it was being stitched. So we'll make that change on screen and then close the window. And you can see the pressure foot now is a little bit higher off the fabric. The change was made. So we're ready to begin the stitching of that seam now, and it will not drag the pocket or push against the pocket as it begins stitching. When the stitching is complete, then you'll remove it from the hoop. To get the excess stabilizer off, because we fused it, you need to heat it and then peel it back up off of there. Then you can go ahead and trim around the edges. And the last thing to do would be to go ahead and get your fuse, your gentle touch, to be able to place that into position over the design. And then what I like to do is kind of take one of the marking pens and kind of draw the shape for me, so that then you can round it out a little bit, and then you'll secure it to the back of the shirt, and that'll give it a nice soft touch versus something that's a little bit more scratchy with both the stabilizer and the excess thread. Okay, now that we have finished those shirts, there was a couple other things I wanted to tell you. One being, on this sample, I did a self lining with the knit, and it turned out very nice. It's a little bulkier. So I also tried it using a piece of cotton fabric as the lining, something similar to match or a fun print. And it was just a little less bulky, especially when you go to turn it and get your corners turned. So as you can see, this In the Hoop collection has lots of versatility, and you can buy an already purchased t-shirt and make it so much better, or make your own and add this special touch to it. So I hope this has gotten you inspired to kind of step outside your box and do something different. And be sure to take a look at that collection, which is In the Hoop Pocket Peekers. There's lots of different themes, not just sharks. So enjoy, and we'll see you next time.